Just to let everyone know that this meeting will be recorded and shared with participants who could not join us today, and also for you to refer back on when you need to. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we all gather today, and also particularly acknowledge the Worimi people as the traditional owners of the land in Port Stephens, where North Arm Cove is situated, which is the subject of our competition. I would also like to pay my respect to their elders, past and present. I also extend the respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be listening to this session at any point. Moving to this session, our guest speaker today is Professor Sara Wilkinson, who is going to talk to us about conceptual understanding of sustainability. Sara is a chartered building surveyor and Australia's first female professor of property. Her trans-disciplinary research program sits at the intersection of sustainability, urban development, and transformation, with a focus on green cities and preparing our urban environmentalists for the challenge of the climate change. Sara works with academic and industry partners in engineering, science, health, and business, and her recent work includes projects that use virtual reality to assess customers' willingness to pay for a green infrastructure in a residential housing development. This is all extremely topical for our competitors, for our competition, and I'm looking forward to hearing Sara's presentation. So welcome, Sara, and your mic is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, well, good evening, everybody. Right, I think I go to, yeah. So I'm going to be talking probably for about 45 minutes, and hopefully that gives us sort of 10, 15 minutes for any discussion afterwards. So as Diane said, this presentation today is looking at the conceptual understanding of sustainability and how it either subconsciously or consciously influences our design and planning practices. And hopefully when you've heard this presentation, you can apply some of this thinking to the North Arm Cove project, but also your other work. The shorter title for this is What Sort of Environmentalist Are You? And I started getting interested in this in 1988, when the practice I was working for in London asked me to provide some advice to BP, British Petroleum. They'd just built millions of gallons of oil into Prince William Sound, which was a pristine environment in Canada, and they were looking for a good news story. And the partners in the practice said to me, they want us to advise them on environmental buildings. And I said, what do you mean, environmental buildings? They said, green building. I said, green building? I've never heard of a green building. And so I went off and I did some reading, and I found that there were green buildings, greener buildings, environmentally sensitive buildings, environmentally friendly buildings. And I thought, are these the same thing or are they different? And that's what got me into this. So that then evolved into a master's, which was, what is a green building? So today we're going to look at what sort of environmentalist are you? We're going to look at a little short history of sustainable development and the definitions, look at what they mean, and then look at some of the economic, social, environmental and philosophical thinking that underpins the concepts of sustainability. Looking at what's on the current debate or the agenda for sustainable development and what's not on the development. And then we'll look at some innovations that we're working on at UTS that might interest you. So our potted history. Well, it was actually mentioned in 400 BC by the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who talked about a sustained yield in household economics, and talk about a balance of income and outgoings. It was also referred to in the 1700s when it was used in reference to forestry. And that was the concept of making sure that you were replanting trees that you were also harvesting, so that you had a continuing supply of trees in your forest. Coming up to more recent times, Rachel Carson was an ecologist, and she wrote a book in the late 1950s called Silent Spring. And this really alerted us to the use of chemicals in agriculture. And what had happened post-World War II, there was much greater use of chemicals. And what this was doing was killing all the bugs and the bees and the pollinators. And so because those animals weren't there, then the birds didn't come to feed off of those. And so what was happening in spring was, instead of hearing all the bird song and all the animals, there was silence. And so we started to understand that we were having an impact on the natural environment. Then in the early 1970s, there was a major report called The Limits to Growth. And that was basically looking at global consumption and population, and maybe questioning how many people could the planet sustain, and were we going beyond the limits to growth, and what would be the consequences of that. So obviously, since then, the pace has got faster and faster, more and more reports and comments. There was one yesterday, I think David Attenborough and the UN person were talking about our impact on the climate, and how we really had to act urgently now if we weren't to have a major sort of catastrophe. In the late 1980s, Gro Brundtland, who was the chair of the United Nations group, who prepared the Brundtland Report, and this has established one of the most widely recognized definitions of sustainable development, and that is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this has two really important concepts. You've got the concepts of needs as opposed to wants. So I need shelter, I need food, I need safety, security. I might want a Ferrari, but I don't need one. And the idea of limitations. So these are imposed by the state of technology, but also the social organisation on the environment's ability to meet the current and the future needs. So the idea of, they call it intergenerational equity and intra-generational equity. And that is the idea of passing on to the next generation the same sort of opportunities that the current generation has. So if we're cooking the planet, then obviously it's going to be much harder for the next generation to thrive and survive. So this is a definition that you will often see recurring and adopted by different organisations, in different countries, government and private organisations alike, and they vary them slightly. So moving on to the sort of the way we frame this definition of sustainable development, John Elkington introduced the concept of the triple bottom line. And for him, he said sustainability has got three main areas. You've got social sustainability, economic sustainability, and environmental sustainability. And where all three overlap and are considered, that's where you get sustainability. Now, the little image here on the slide shows that if you've got economic and social sustainability, you tend to have equitable development, or equitable, that's right, that's better pronunciation. Equitable development. So, for example, affordable housing in social housing would be an example of that. It's affordable and it's dealing with the social need. On the other hand, if you just have environmental and economic, it could be viable, but it wouldn't, if it doesn't have that social aspect, it wouldn't necessarily be sustainable. So you can see things start to get interpreted and people overlay their ideas and it gets more complex. So we're going to have a look at a few more definitions to see how others have then interpreted this. Now, this one here is a public transport organisation. So you can see from this diagram that we've still got those three circles. We've got environment and economy. Social has become society, which may or may not be the same thing. You can also see the text in their on their diagram sort of suits their transport, the fact that they're in the transport sector. So, for example, in economy, economic development combined with sustainable transport systems bring in solid economic growth. And where the economic and the social overlap, then you've got social inclusion bringing economic prosperity. The text that I found in this definition was, you can see there highlighted in bold, that's the Brundtland definition, a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. But you can see underneath where they expand upon it, the field of sustainable development can be conceptually broken into three constituent parts. So environment becomes environmental protection. Economy is economic sustainability, and social is social justice. So again, you can see they're slightly tweaking and expanding the definition to suit their own conceptual understanding. So that's that one. Now, oops. I'm just, where's the next slide? There we go. So what I would like you to do is have a little think for a minute and think, when you think of sustainable development, what sort of things come to mind? So just have a little think about the sort of things that come into your mind. Okay. So quite possibly you may have started to think about things like energy conservation, recycling waste, and it might be recycling waste during the construction process or during the building life cycle. It might be reducing consumption, so buying less consumables. using less resources. It might be around transportation. I think this year already, global greenhouse gas emissions decreased by about 9%. And of that 9%, 40% of that 9% was because air travel had more or less stopped because of the COVID pandemic. So travel makes up a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So we've also got energy efficiency and conserving energy. Some people will look at embodied energy. So you might have, say, a material like concrete or steel. So steel and concrete used in building construction both have a lot of embodied energy in the extraction of the raw materials and transportation, and then your manufacturing process into, say, steel beams or concrete columns involves a lot of energy. So there's a lot of energy compared in those materials compared to, say, timber frame buildings, where the timber is just logged and then sort of left to mature, treated, and then brought to the site. Other aspects that could be considered are social sustainability, which is things like healthy buildings, affordable buildings, affordable housing, etc. And then finally, another thing increasingly that we find is the idea of applying technology. So you can have smart buildings or smart cities and smart precincts. So the idea here is we actually use computer technology to moderate the amount of energy that we use. So you might have a building that has automatic shading, and then as the sun moves across the building, shading goes to either deflect heat off of the building or to get more light into the building. And the idea that's all moderated by technology and not by human beings. Okay, so this is another one that I came across, which is a very complex diagram showing an organisation's understanding of sustainability. But what this shows, I think, is the complexity and the interactions with various aspects of sustainability. So each of the circles or nodes represents a different aspect of sustainability, and then shows how it's connected or related to other aspects of sustainability. So again, often when we're making decisions, there are consequences sort of further down the line and things to be balanced and evaluated. So when I looked at all these different definitions, and as I say, looking at green buildings, greener buildings, environmentally friendly buildings, and I thought to myself, well, is it possible to classify these different perspectives? Are they the same or are they different? Are they distinctive? And the answer is yes, it is. And what I'd like to do now is show you how it can be done and also what I've found. So broadly speaking, there are two philosophical perspectives. One is an ecocentric perspective, and this means earth-centered, eco-earth-centered. And within that, there are three groups. There's transpersonal ecology, deep ecology, and moderate ecology. And the images on this slide show some of the different worldviews that this particular group have. So, for example, they believe in animal rights being equal to human rights. So we do not have license to pollute the seas so that animals can't survive in the seas, for example. We don't necessarily have the rights to eat and consume animals. We should consume ethically. So we need to think about where things come from. So buying things that are made under, slave-like conditions where people get paid and treated very poorly is not considered ethical. When we look at the idea of consuming resources, with the ecocentric worldview, it's to reduce your consumption, then to reuse things, to rebuy things, and to recycle is the last stage, because with recycling there's an additional energy input as you convert a material from one thing to another thing. So that's an ecocentric worldview. Now the other view is an anthropocentric and also a technocentric worldview. Now, anthropo means human-centered and technocentric, technology-centered. And within this group, there are two types of environmentalists, and one is called an accommodating environmentalist. Now, for accommodating environmentalists, they would see renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, tide power as being good alternatives to fossil fuels. However, they do see that man or humans are at the top of the food chain, if you like, and that because we can think and talk and organize ourselves, we have the right to consume the world the way, and its resources, the way we think fit. So the two images there with a person eating the world and another one having the world in their hand is very much characteristic of this perspective. And then the final one is the cornucopian environmentalists, and this is probably the least green of the 5 groups. And as you can see on this slide in the images, for them sustainable development is a very simple thing. You just add water to it and there you are, you've got sustainable development. It's not complicated at all. There's no barriers on consumption, so we can consume all of the resources. They have a view that once we've exhausted one resource, then we'll find an alternative. Nuclear energy is very, very okay with this group, and they like the idea of recycling. They don't see this need to reduce consumption or to reuse. Recycling is fine. So what I did, and what is shown on this table, is read lots of books about green thinking and conceptual understanding, and started to plot what the different groups' thinking was on a number of areas. And it's not the full table here, but it's taken from a couple of papers that I wrote. So on the left-hand side, we've got the viewpoint, and you can see on this page we've got the belief system, views on population, views on resource consumption, the worldview, and I think their views on waste. Oops, yeah, okay, waste. Okay, so what we can see with the transpersonal ecologists, for example, they have an almost religious kind of view in the way we should be using resources on the world. Where the boxes are empty, that's because I couldn't find any view expressed on that area by that group. So they don't talk about the instrumental value of nature or the rights of humans, and they don't talk about the carrying capacity of the earth in their literature. They're characterized as emotional and irrational, which is perhaps a little bit negative, whereas the anthropocentric groups are seen as rational and pro-science. You can see that when it comes to faith in technology, that goes from the technocentric to the ecocentric. Both the deep ecology and the moderate ecology groups lack faith in technology. It's only really the cornucopian environmentalists that have this belief in science and technology to come up with all the solutions. Interestingly, when we get to population, the ecocentric groups all talk about population, and their views range from having zero population growth to actually a population cull. So you can see that's quite extreme. I'm not sure how they'd decide who got the chop. But then on the technocentric group, they don't talk about population at all. It's not on their agenda. And again, with resource consumption, again, you can see from exploitative to extreme preservationist, from an ecocentric to an anthropocentric worldview. And then finally with race and what have you. The next, let's look here. The next slide here just has some content on their economic perspectives and the energy perspectives. And with the economy, again, you can see that the transpersonal ecologists reject consumerism. Capitalism is not sustainable, whereas at the other end of the spectrum, the cornucopians think we should maximize growth. Capitalism is sustainable. We've got substitution theory, laissez-faire economics. Green consumerism is accepted. Consumerism is promoted, and let's get some foreign trade agreements, and etc., etc. And then finally, along the bottom, you can see going from very, very strong sustainability to strong, weak, and very weak sustainability. Now, what I do have is a quiz that I give my students, and they answer it, and each answer, it's a multiple choice quiz, and each answer is a different perspective. And then when we go through it, I ask them, in your answers, were you all within one group? Say, were you all accommodating environmentalist, or were you all deep ecology? And they never are. They go all over the place. And I'll come back to that in a moment. This diagram here is trying to show how this all sort of works figuratively. So the big circle is sustainability, and that's political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental sustainability. And as I was saying, there's a bit of a major break between the anthropocentric environmentalists and then the ecocentric ecology perspectives, and they go from strong to weak. Now you can see with all of the circles inside that they all slightly overlap, because if you go back to the table, you can see that some ideas are shared across different groups and some are very different. So what I've done, I did this originally in the 90s, I revisited it in the noughties and also in the teens, was to find out from organisations in the built environment, what sort of worldviews they had. And this diagram here just shows the same diagram as the previous slide, but we have the built environment, and this was a paper on sort of property development and real estate organisations' perspectives of sustainability. But that could be architectural firms, it could be planning, it could be government, it could be the private sector or whatever. And then what I did was I looked at their documentation about sustainability. What I've found over the years is when you talk to people, they green up in front of you, because to say that I don't care about the environment, you know, is possibly socially not very acceptable. And so they tend to have a bit of guilt. So they tend to express very green things that you don't see actually being realised in practice. So with the website, that's a great resource because companies can put whatever they really think onto their website. And so having a look on websites and having a look at documentation that organisations have about sustainability, you can do a content analysis to see what they're talking about and then what they're saying, what's included in their discourse about sustainability. And this slide here shows 5 different organisations and the views that they were expressing, and what we can see from this one. So this was the most recent one from the probably 2012, I think this was, that all the views they were expressing were within the anthropocentric, technocentric worldview, and some were accommodated environmentalists, but some weren't. So overall, the conclusion was we've still got a fairly weak conceptual understanding, or a weak sustainability conceptual understanding. Now, what sort of moving on, what about the built environment and architecture? This again is another definition taken from an architectural practice website, and talks about their conceptual understanding of sustainability or sustainable architecture. So it's keeping in mind environmental goals and sustainable development, seeking to reduce the negative environmental impact of buildings, increasing efficiency, moderation, utilisation of building materials, etc., etc. So you get to see kind of what's within this conceptual understanding. Now, one of the things I mentioned was sort of high tech and low tech, and the 2 images at the bottom of the slide here give you an example there. So we've got sort of straw bale construction, which is a very old technique, and you know, uses materials that don't have a lot of processing involved in them. You use the thermal mass to create a interior climate which is cool in summer and warm in winter. They usually face up the straw bales with either a render or sometimes a timber finish. So that's a low-tech approach. A high-tech approach, on the other hand, with the right-hand side. Now, this was a design from the Middle East, and you can see it's very futuristic. It seems to be almost floating, or it's definitely surrounded by water. And we've got lots of technology to circulate the air within the structure, to clean up water, etc., etc. So this is a very high-tech approach. Now, I guess the question is, which is best? Are both useful in certain circumstances, or is it a blend of both? And certainly with our smart cities agenda and our smart precincts and our smart buildings, we're definitely going very much down the technology route, I think, at the moment. And it may be that it can deliver good things. Now, some of the things that I wanted to just talk about with some of the innovations that we're working on at UTS. As Diane was saying earlier, I work with marine biologists, mechatronic engineers, horticultural scientists, as well as biomaterials engineers. So these are often people, when they contact me and say what they do, I have to go and look up what that professional area is because it's not familiar to me. And I really like that because, they see the world differently to me. And sort of when I was doing my PhD, I was looking at building adaptation of office buildings in the Melbourne CBD, and I had a big database. And as I was looking at the buildings, I, for some reason, thought, well, we could put green roofs on those buildings and retrofit those buildings with green roofs. And so I put another column in my database and wrote a paper on it, the potential for retrofitting green roofs. And it was a very popular paper, and that really woke me up to the biophilia effect of nature, that humans like to be in nature and it gives them a sense of well-being. And the benefits of green infrastructure: they can attenuate the urban heat island, they purify the air because plants give off oxygen and absorb carbon dioxide, they have a habitat for biodiversity, they have a thermal performance on roofs and walls to reduce energy use inside. So there's lots of benefits, but unlike the Central Park building opposite UTS, and that you can see in that picture on the right-hand side there, we haven't had a really big uptake of them. And this is because one of the barriers is the maintenance costs and the occupational health and safety issues of people sort of working from cradles on the sides of tall buildings. And that made me think, well, maybe we could have a robot or a wallbot that could perform that maintenance. And you can see the little prototype that we've got there at the top of the slide, working with a mechatronics engineer, because I don't know the first thing about robotics, but he does, and he was able to design a prototype. It's got sensors that look at the air quality, the moisture quality in the green wall modules. We look at plant health, and our second iteration of this is going to be the maintenance function, but also integrating the console panel into a building management system so that we've got a smart green wall. Another one there, down at the bottom there, this is a BIQ building, which is designed by Arup in Hamburg in 2013 for a sustainability competition. And it's a passive house design, which means it's very energy efficient, but those facade panels are filled with algae. Now, algae is a natural organism, and my experience of algae up until this point, when a marine biologist asked me to meet him and showed me this building, was that it was a problem, because algae is also known as slime, and It will form if you've got leaks in the water services within buildings. It often has an odour. So I had quite a negative perception of this, but Peter thinks algae is the best organism on the planet and showed me this building. And what they do is they grow the biomass in those glazed panels, and then the biomass is harvested and it can be converted to biofuel. So once you've got a fuel, you've got your energy source for the building. Now, I did a feasibility study, and I've published a few papers now with Peter Ralph, he's the marine biologist, and Arnaud Castel, he's a French bioengineer who's also working at UTS. And I was amazed. Once I started reading about algae, I realized not only can you use it as biofuel, but you can also bioremediate water. So you could have a tank underneath this building that bioremediated grey water, and you could then use that for flushing toilets. But also, if you had a green roof or green walls, you could use that wastewater for watering the plants. So these are projects that we're working on at UTS. I've got a couple of panels on top of the science faculty that are just waiting to be filled up with algae and tested for production rates in Australia, because we thought that it was quite possible that we'd get higher rates of production than they did in Germany because we have sunnier days. The other thing with algae is it's a really good source of protein, and that little YouTube link there, it's a 2-minute video, and at the end of the video the engineer eats the algae, which is a little bit confronting. But when I started reading about that, I found out it's a really good source of protein, and at the moment humans get most of their protein from meat, and cattle fart huge amounts of methane, which is one of the most potent greenhouse gases. So the more meat we eat, the more methane is emitted into the atmosphere, with huge consequences for climate change. The other thing is algae can be used in pharmaceutical products, and there are something like, they estimate there's somewhere between 300 and 500,000 different species of algae globally. And obviously this building has only tested one type, but it could be that building facades become income generating. So if you've got a pharmaceutical company that wants to pay thousands of dollars per kilo of a particular type of algae to use in their product, that could be a different way of building and designing. And then of course there's social sustainability. Whoops, now just keeping an eye on time. I think I'm coming towards the end. So the green building rating tools, a lot of people really like these because they give you a framework. They classify and categorize all of the criteria that collectively they think are significant. And they first started, BREEAM was the Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment Method. That was a UK system that was launched in 1991. So that was, I think, one of the first cabs off the rank in respect of green building rating tools. Some are national, some are international. So LEED is an American-based system, and then Green Star is the one we use in Australia, but is also, as you can see from that example, adopted internationally. So developers and owners do have choices. Do we want to go for the LEED one or the Green Star one? The trouble is, possibly what happens is as I've put there, is we're in danger of hitting the targets but missing the point, because we just then refer to what's on the green star list of things or on the lead list of things, and we'll go through that tick list because we want to have that level of rating. And once we've got that level of rating, we won't go any higher because that's the rating that the market likes. And they call that lead brain because there's a recognition that that sometimes actually inhibits environmental thought. So just to sort of draw things to a conclusion, very, very quickly sort of explain some definitions and different conceptual perspectives of sustainable development. And what I concluded with my MPhil is sustainable or sustainability is what they call an essentially contestable concept. And what that means is it means different things to different people. And another example of a contested concept is home. So if you have a discussion about home, for some people it is their sanctuary. For other people, it's an economic investment. For some people, sadly, home is a place of terror or victimization, unhappiness. It varies from person to person. Now, I've said there, does it matter? Yes and no, I think, is the answer. It doesn't necessarily matter if we acknowledge that and we seek to try and get a deeper understanding of the perspectives that we all have, so that at least we're all acknowledging that and we're on the same page when it comes to design solutions for new communities, for existing communities. The other thing is, where do we stand in Australia compared to other countries? In many respects, we are falling behind in some areas, and in other places, they seem to be a bit further ahead. The minimum standards, for example, in building regulations with regards to energy or water consumption are higher in other countries. We are making some progress, but it's not as fast as it needs to be. Possibly technology will deliver the changes that are needed, but we have to be careful that they're not seen as the only solution. They're part of the solution, but not the only solution. Time, of course, will tell, but the clock is ticking ever more loudly. So hopefully you can now apply some conscious thinking to the solutions that you come up with for the North Arm Cove project in respect of sustainability. So thank you very much for listening, and if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Sara, very much. It was extraordinary. I think it's, even for me, it's I've thought about a lot of those things, but never had time to assemble everything in in a system. It is great presentation. Thank you very much. We have a few questions at the moment. Let me just see how we go. One is, I don't know how much, if it's to you, but I think it's partly you can answer at least part of it. How much is the sustainability related to the mentality of North Arm Cove population? And will the current population be able to use the technical equipment to maintain smart buildings? The current demographics of the area, for example, are mostly aged people. How is this changing the concept of sustainability with the specific age category? Yeah, two questions, but back.
Thank you, Sophia. That's a really good question, because obviously with older people, in some respects, possibly their habits are more ingrained and they're used to behaving in certain ways. Human behavior is a huge aspect of sustainability. Just as an aside, I have lived in house shares with people that are very high up in their professions, who think it's okay to have the air conditioning on and windows open. I mean, that's, and just hadn't put the two together. And when you have a conversation with that person, they're very committed to sustainability and environmentalism, but their behavior, and again, this teaching people how to use things is very, very important. So I think with any design solution, you would really want to think about your occupants, as you've rightly highlighted, and what training and education would they need, and what are they likely to do or not to do. And if I would say, if it's unlikely that people would be able to change their behavior, then it might be better to try and let technology moderate the environment. So, for example, you might have buildings that moderate perhaps temperature, air quality. They may sort of turn heating or cooling off once it gets to a certain level automatically, rather than keeping things going. It may be, if somebody does want to switch on the cooling, it automatically shuts all the windows. There may be different ways of doing it. We're very much at the cutting edge with a lot of these things. So you have to sort of think through, would this work? Would it work technically? Is it right socially and ethically? Because obviously we wouldn't want to trap people inside a locked building just because they'd accidentally switched the air conditioning on when they thought it was a light switch or something like that. So, lots of things to think about. Now, if with the North Arm Cove, the properties are managed centrally by an organisation, then they may be able to get economies of scale. So they may be able to have like a precinct scale energy and water provision. So like the Central Park, for example, that's got centralised water systems, rainwater harvesting for using in bathrooms and toilets and things like that. So people in that development are using water sustainably without even knowing it. Yeah.
So a lot of it, if I may just add a few points, we are going to have presentations about different systems. Passive house system is basically automatic system, so it doesn't really require any particular action. It's actually when you want to do override in very specific situations, then you have to do some action. There are other systems. Obviously, smart technology assumes that it's actually simple, same as smartphones, so it's user-friendly. So
Yeah.
that is the advantage of that technology, that it actually should, part of it should mean that it's a user-friendly, it's actually smart.
Yeah.
So,
yes, that's right. That's right. I mean,
also, I would like to just add to people that part of our, okay, we are working in a team environment. So within a team, students would need to start communicating among themselves with a different roles, with different professions. So this would be, for instance, question for a community organizer or a social professional who is dealing with a community. So they should provide these answers. They should research how is the, how to deal with a issue of aged population in a new technology. So they should provide, they should research that. And we are actually providing one of the lessons is a presentation next week is about the, from the New Democracy Foundation is about the people's basically democratic process that is different than just overvoting. It's participation where experts provide all the information. They're not there to provide the answers. They're there to educate people, and people then, when understanding the procedures, technology, and everything, they make decisions where and how to implement it. So that might be one of the answers. We are just here providing some alternative views, alternative approaches.
Yeah. I saw Joanne's question about other approaches, and I was just making sure I got the right one. There's an organization called Caterva.net. I'll just type that in the bottom, and they have a very different outlook and perspective. It's very much an ecocentric sort of bio perspective on sustainability, and they have got, I believe they have a tool to measure sustainability. That, you know, the challenges with these developments, you know, if they're being financed by an organization that's on the stock market, and they're probably going to want to have the tools that the market recognizes and is familiar with, because you might get a rating on the Caterva system and nobody knows what it means. They don't know whether it's good or bad or what. But yeah, so I mean, it's could be worth having a look at that. And as I say, the current sort of rating tools that we've got, are quite limited in some respects. The other question there from Noah, interesting, the Water Griffin city plans, again, I went back to my education sort of 30 years ago. And we learned about Ebenezer Howard's Garden City of Tomorrow, and the idea of planning a system. A lot of systems had just evolved naturally over time. So having this concept of planning a whole precinct, and certainly, there's a lot of that going on. I think there is a lot of good in those ideas, and they certainly do work over time. Obviously, when Ebenezer Howard and Walter Griffiths sort of had their ideas, technology was very, very different. I did a webinar about a month ago, and one of the questions was, what do you think the built environment will be like in 50 years time? And I thought, oh my God. Okay. And I thought, well, what was it like 50 years ago? Now, 50 years ago, we didn't have computers. We didn't have AI, we didn't have big data, we didn't even have sustainability, and I can remember the first computer, because the professional practitioners, I mean, we had dictaphones and we used to dictate all of our reports onto little tape recorders and give those to secretaries, and secretaries used to sit and type. And we went into the office one day and there was this huge thing on her desk, and we said to her, what's that? And she said, they call it a computer. I said, well, what does it do? And they said, it's like a typewriter. Little did we know. But yeah, so it's very hard sometimes to put things into perspective. And so I think when you look at those precedents, there certainly are some universal transferable things. but perhaps the way they're realized might be a little bit different. And I think, as Diane was saying, the idea of having the sensible design, the passive design, perhaps using low energy materials. Hempcrete is another project I'm working on at the moment, which uses hemp as a binder, and that tries to capture. I'm also working with a carbon leadership forum, and they're based globally, but their goal is to be carbon positive. And as I say, it's interesting because when I look at green infrastructure, for example, you look at the area a building takes up. And so we displace all the natural environment that's there that the building footprint sits on. But if you put green roofs on and you put some green walls on, you can actually be net positive with green infrastructure. So, you know, there's some positive things there that you could have development that actually gives something back more than was there.
We will have next week a presentation by Sebastian. I can't remember now the surname. From Belgium, AM2 architects, who are actually working on a project where they are. You know, that's not a question, is it carbon positive or carbon negative? So they are beyond zero.
Yeah.
So they are actually basically doing what the natural environment is doing. They are acquiring the CO2 instead of releasing it. So that's one of the things. Just to answer partly to Noah's question, well, this whole competition is about that question. So it's up to you to find out, is that plan worth preserving? Is there anything in that plan that is still applicable? That's the reason. That's the question that we are asking you to, take part in a discovery.
Yeah, of course. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Like, the reason I was just prying at that question itself is because, from what I understand of the Walter Burley Griffin plan of Canberra, is that it's very vehicle centric, and they're actually having a lot of vehicle congestion problems on Northbourne and looking to redirect that around it. And I just thought that was an interesting topic to analyze.
Yeah. I mean, some cities now are looking at sort of greener forms of transport and, not having vehicles that consume oil and petrochemicals. Whereas I think, we like the idea of cities that are walkable, where you can use bicycles, so you're getting some exercise, and so there's all sorts of things to take into consideration.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have just typed in, there are two resources that students can explore. One is Narara Eco Village, that is here in our Central Coast.
Yeah.
That is something that it's different scale and it's different principles, but some very useful principles are applied there. So they are self-sustainable, or they're meant to be self-sustainable. They are potentially self-sustainable. So they collect their own water, they recycle, they build houses. All have to achieve certain level of sustainability, including the hempcrete and other straw as well, and other elements. So that's one. The other one is the Hamilton Islands. I don't know if anyone has been there. It's pretty posh, so it's not for students. But that one actually has only. I mean, they have about 1,500 permanent residents plus the tourists.
Mm-hmm.
They have streets and they have public transport and private transport, but it's done not by car. They have only like 5 cars on the whole island, on 1,500 people, but they have a golf carts.
Yeah.
So all the traffic, everything is done on 20 kilometer per hour, speed, but it's quiet. It's electrical, and it's different, but it's here. It's Australia, so you don't have to go on other side of the world to find it. It's local experience. So that's one example. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe worth considering.
Yeah. Another thing I just thought of actually while you were speaking, Diane, is social sustainability. I think with older people, you know, having social interaction is very important. So possibly looking at having spaces where people can meet that are going to be cool, shaded, they don't get exposed to too much heat. You know, that they might be things to think about with the design.
Any more questions? I think we are a bit over the time. I hope you don't mind, Sara. I think it was for me it was great presentation and great news, and I think we are very engaging questions as well. We will probably count on you at some point later in a process to join us for some mentoring and some answering and some further questions. But you know, I think you provided excellent leads and excellent information for a start. And yeah, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Well, good luck, everybody, and I look forward to seeing some of your solutions in due course.
Okay, so that's end of this presentation, and thank you very much, everyone, and see you soon.